Councilmember Elridge. Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Williams.
Well, we do just barely have a quorum of the council. We have a number of council members who are traveling or out of town today. So this is pretty much who will be here for this meeting. Since we have a quorum of 4 members, we can go ahead and proceed. Are there any council comments or announcements? No comments?
I'll just, let's see, keep the council informed that I was honored to be at Valerie Irvin's kickoff earlier today and am endorsing her for the District 5 County Council race, and hope that others will watch the campaign closely. I think you'll like her as a candidate.
Any other comments? Okay, we will move on to the public comment period. This is the time on the agenda set aside for comments on items that are not on our special session agenda. We'll provide time for comments on the special session items when they come up on the agenda. And if I would ask when you come forward for this or the special session item comments, if you could identify yourself and keep your comments to no more than 3 minutes, and we'll have a timer up on the podium to assist you with knowing when your 3 minutes are up. And our sound expert will make sure the microphone works.
I'm shocked not to see Mr. Lovelace here. I don't think I've ever spoken first. I consider him an institution. I hope he's okay.
He's on holiday today.
Oh, good for him. My name is Mark Hessel, and I wanted to make a couple real brief comments today. And one is to urge, I know the council can't do a lot on rent stabilization tonight. There aren't a lot of, more than a bare quorum here tonight. But I want to urge the council to keep moving forward on consideration of rent control and affordable housing and what the council intends to do. Primarily because I think it's important for the city to do. But I was speaking with the attorney for Southern Management earlier today, and he asked me to convey to the council that his boss is hot to trot, so to speak. I don't think those were his exact words, on filing suit against the city. And I've been counseling him, hold off on it. You know, the council is moving forward. And he's saying he can't hold his boss off much longer. And I don't represent Southern on this lawsuit. I'm just kind of conveying what they've asked me to convey. But separately from that, because I don't make threats, separately from that, I really do urge the council to really move forward with thinking about affordable housing and doing something on the rent control issue. Also, while I've got the podium for a few more seconds, this weekend I read the city's affordable housing policy and action plan. I was kind of struck by the fact that there are a bunch of small initiatives in there. There's really nothing that involves making sure there's affordable housing in the long term by more pilot program initiatives or by working with nonprofits and the city using its own money to fund substantial efforts to acquire property and lock it up as affordable rental property. And I think that, I'm not proposing that the council revisit its plan, but its plan doesn't reach very far. And if you have a lot of condominium conversion down the road, the plan's not going to really have very far to go. Even a lot of the initiatives in there for helping people learn how to become homeowners and all that, very good. But chances are pretty good it's not going to be in Tacoma Park anyhow. And so you really have to think about, can we come up with some money to do good things in the area of affordable housing? And that's it for tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, we are planning to revise our affordable housing plan. It's one of the things that we're going to be doing in this list of things on affordable housing that we're working on. So we are planning to do something like that. Anyone else?
Yes. My name is Harry Levin, and I represent the owners of the property located at 7102 to 7104 Maple Avenue. This is a great building with historic designation. Until 1998, it was owned by my father-in-law, who left the building in trust for his wife, who died on the 25th of December, 2003. My wife and her sister are now the trustees. There are 4 units in this building. Each has 2 bedrooms plus a full living room and dining room. Each apartment is about 1,350 square feet. The building is only 1.5 blocks away from Metro. The apartments would easily rent for well over $1,500 per month. 3 of the 4 units are now sitting empty because of rent control. The one remaining tenant pays just $652 per month. The tenant is a contractor who wants to buy the property for a fraction of the market value so that he can develop it. The tenant has been a general contractor for over 20 years. He owns his own company that lists on its website more than 10 extensive projects already in progress and many other award-winning projects. He knows what he is doing. Based on the projects listed, I would have to think that the tenant's income is in excess of $100,000 to $250,000 per year. The tenant knew about rent control and used that knowledge to take advantage of the heirs. He negotiated with the heirs to sign a long-term lease with rent of $850 per month, knowing that the legal rent was quite a bit lower. After the lease was signed and the owners refused to sell him the building for less than the market value, he filed a complaint based on illegally high rent. I am not saying that the landlord should be held harmless. The landlord should have known about the limitations of rent control. My point is that Tacoma Park should not have a public policy that is designed to benefit tenants like this. Tacoma Park should focus on providing affordable housing to people who need help. I strongly urge the City Council to vote for full vacancy decontrol and use the extra property tax revenues that it will receive as a result to help people who really need this help. At this point, the owner's options are limited. The only thing that makes economic sense is to convert the building to condos now and then sell the units. The owners would much rather rent the units at market rates, but the city has not left it with any other choice.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to speak? All right, not seeing anyone else. We will move on to the city manager's comments.
Just a few comments initially on the community center project. As the council is aware, but the community may not be, we were successful in obtaining occupancy for phase 2 of the community center project last Wednesday. And we had our grand opening celebration last Thursday and Friday. I know Councilmember Siemens was there. There may have been others. We just happened, and Councilmember Austin Landry, the mayor. And would like to take this opportunity to express my appreciation to the Recreation Department for all their hard work in pulling that off. We had some delay in getting the inspections just due to the volume of activity at Montgomery County. They literally had less than 24 hours to basically get all the space set up and to basically prepare for an event that seemed to be enjoyed by everyone. And when the facility is open again, if you can sneak your way in there to some of the game room, it is quite fun. Some of the staff and I had an opportunity to try it out before it opened up. Another item I just wanted to update the council about is, as we've talked about before, the residential property on Piney Branch Road, 8425. We had a gentleman who was interested in buying it. The council had awarded a contract for the sale of that property, but he had encountered some difficulties in financing, as you might recall, because it's sort of a fixer-upper. Despite everyone's best efforts, the prospective buyer, Mr. Hanratty, was unable to overcome that financing obstacle, and basically I have signed an agreement of release so that basically we can all kind of move on. It really is an unfortunate situation. He was someone who very much wanted to live in the community, and we were hopeful that would work out. There is another party who has expressed some interest in purchasing the property. In discussions with the city attorney's office, we would be required to basically rebid it, and we'll be moving expeditiously to get that process moving forward. The last item relative to the community center project that I wanted to report has to do with the additional soil borings. The council had committed some funding for that, and we had retained the firm of ECS to do that work. I did receive their report at approximately 4:30 this afternoon, so obviously I haven't had really much of an opportunity to look at it. Just in glancing through it, it does seem to be very detailed. I'll be taking a more close look at that this week and probably having some discussions with the city engineer since it is fairly technical. But hopefully after the council returns, we'll have an opportunity to talk about what their findings were. Unrelated to the community center project, there were just two items I wanted to report on. One, as the council is aware, we will have a group of mayors and vice mayors from 10 small cities in Honduras and Nicaragua who will be visiting Tacoma Park this Thursday. Suzanne Ludlow, our community and government liaison, did send an email out about this earlier today, and they are here basically on a 2-week leadership program that's being sponsored by Georgetown University and the U.S. State Department. While they are visiting Tacoma Park, they would very much like to have the opportunity to meet with some of the city council members and to kind of get your viewpoint on being an elected official in Tacoma Park. There are really two opportunities that you would really have to interact with them. One would be at lunch, which we'll be hosting a luncheon at El Golfo, probably beginning more or less around 12:30, and then they'll be wrapping up their day in Tacoma Park here at the community center from 3 to 4. If you would be able to find some time in your busy schedules to join the mayors and vice mayors at either one of those times, if you could please let Suzanne know, because she has an idea of who might be joining us and can plan accordingly. The last item I just wanted to mention has to do with some noise complaints, I guess, that are kind of coming in, and Councilmember Elrich had brought this to my attention, had inquired about it coming from Washington Adventist Hospital, had the opportunity today to trade some voicemails with Jerry Stocks to try to find out what was going on, and for anyone in the community who lives in that area and has been hearing some rather excessive noise, what Mr. Stocks informed me is that they have a feeder line to one of their chillers. That's obviously an integral part of their HVAC systems that's been having some problems. That has been basically causing some voltage drops, and basically their HVAC systems have been sort of on the blink. Obviously, being a hospital, that's not something that they can sustain in order to provide patient care, so they have brought in a temporary generator to basically kind of maintain the power flow while they're trying to do some troubleshooting. They're hopeful that they'll identify the problem sometime within the next day or so. Obviously, the worst-case scenario would be if they find there's a problem with a transformer or some other major piece of equipment that needs to be brought in. I have asked Mr. Stocks if he could please send me an email kind of detailing the situation. As soon as I receive that, I will forward that out to the council, and perhaps you can pass it on to any listservs that you may participate in that area. And I'm sure Mr. Stocks will make every effort to keep us up to date as they move forward in trying to identify what that problem is. That concludes my report. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Does the other problem we had was the property tax bills. Is that unique to my ward, or is that happen to other people in the city as well?
The concern that you had forwarded to me this morning, Councilmember Elrich, is the only one that I have received. But as I mentioned to you, we'll continue looking into it. And if it appears that there's any other individuals who might have an issue, certainly we'll be proactive in trying to address that.
It's like 10 or 12 people, so I'm just wondering if she made the same mistake on that form and all the forms, then it may be more widespread.
Yeah, we're still looking into it. Hopefully we'll have some information for you tomorrow. The issue that Councilmember Elrich is referring to is an individual who apparently had an accessory apartment, and there was basically an error or a problem in terms of what is their principal resident and how it impacts their exemption, as I understand it.
It was everybody who had an accessory
apartment.
Was listed as non-owner occupied. And then taxed differently.
Thank you, Mayor Porter. Barb, I really want to tell you how great I thought the grand opening was of the Phase 2 of the community center. It was a great celebration. I was really impressed with kind of how well organized it was and how well attended it was, given that, as you said, there were less than 24 hours between when the occupancy permit was received and when we actually held the event. I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'll pass that on to Ms. Hadovan and her staff. The credit actually is entirely theirs. We had obviously been hopeful that everything would go smoothly and had actually advertised the event well in advance, so we sort of made it in the nick of time in terms of getting the occupancy permit and being able to set it up. But it really is a credit to Deborah and her staff, so I'll be sure to pass that on to them.
Thank you. The other thing I wanted to check, I know that in your absence, I believe last week or the week before, Mr. Hobbs had said that the TRG contract was winding down, and I wanted to check on the status of the burying of the downspout or the piping of the downspouts from the library. I believe you had said that was part of that contract?
Yes, that work was completed. I'm going off memory here, Councilmember Siemens. It was in the financial report that was distributed last week. I think the final price on that ended up being in the range of approximately $17,000. As you may recall, though it's been some time, when that contract was awarded, we had sort of a preliminary price in the range of $37,000 to $38,000. We felt that was somewhat high, so the way the contract award was drafted was that the parties could continue to talk about that. At one point, we went ahead and deleted that from the base contract and then added it back in as a change order item once we were satisfied with the pricing. But that work has been completed.
Maybe I'm confused then on what my expectations were and what was actually completed, because I came by there in the downpour today and saw that rainwater from the downspout on the Philadelphia Avenue side of the building was pouring out of the downspout onto the sidewalk at the library and accumulating down at the bottom near the entrance. And so I had thought it was done, and then I saw that and thought maybe I had misunderstood what was going to be done and what was done. Maybe you need to check
I can
that.
go take a look at, and perhaps we can talk a little bit more at the break. There's a number of downspouts all along that stretch. Perhaps if it's not raining when the break, we can go out and take a look at which one you're referring to.
Okay. And the other related issue is that I know that we've had some water damage inside the library in the past, and as I drove by the building today, I noticed in the corner between the library and the computer learning center, the grade kind of focuses the water down into that corner up against the library wall, and I just wanted to call that to your attention.
There is an issue that we have struggled with, which is unrelated to the construction, where there is a storm inlet in the parking lot near, I guess what I would call the staff entrance to the library. With the heavy downpour we had today, and truthfully all the trees in the area, which make it very difficult to keep that inlet clean at all times, I know that there were some problems, potential problems today. The city engineer was on site, as well as some maintenance staff from Public Works. And haven't had a chance to talk to Mr. Kalilian since this afternoon, but it is something that we may need to look at from an engineering solution, because that drain does have a tendency to get clogged, and that area basically starts flooding with water.
I'm glad you already were aware of it. Thank you.
Any other questions? If there's nothing else, we will move on to the next item on the agenda. We are doing a series of interviews this evening with people who are applying for participation in various city committees. And what I want to do is I want to take the interviews up in the order that they're listed on the agenda. I'm going to ask first the people who are applying for appointment or reappointment to the Personnel Appeals Board, which is Holly Fechner and Anand Parikh, which if you would come up here and sit up here at the front. I don't see Holly, but we are happy to have you here. You are applying for appointment. You're not currently a member of the board. You did send us your letter and your resume, and it seems that you do have a lot of background in employment law. I wonder if you could just talk to us for a minute about why you're interested in being on the Tacoma Park Personnel Appeals Board.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor and council members. I've spoken to Jesse and my council member several times about joining a committee since I moved to Tacoma Park a couple of years ago. Excuse my voice.
Sure.
And I thought with my background, there aren't a whole lot of committees related to the city that I might be qualified for. I'm not an engineer, I'm not a social scientist, and I thought this would be something for me to get my foot in the door and understand how things work and possibly apply my expertise in a positive way for the community.
We certainly do appreciate that. The Personnel Appeals Board is a unique entity. It is an entity that we put together to provide an avenue for appeals of employee grievances. To this date, we actually haven't had to use it, which I think is a positive thing. It means that we've been able to deal with any grievances that came up through other means. And so we hope that we continue not to need it. I think it's a good thing to have. It's a necessary thing for us to have. But just wanted to make sure that you understood that what you were applying to is not necessarily something that was going to be meeting monthly and handling a large number of cases. Fortunately for us, we don't have that situation.
Absolutely. I'm well aware.
Anyone else have any questions they'd like to ask? It was very helpful that you sent your resume and that we could see your background, because it does seem like the background you have would make you very well qualified if we did, unfortunately, have a case that the Personnel Appeals Board had to deal with. So if there's not other questions.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Anna, for coming forward, and we really appreciate you and other active residents, our community, for making these committees work, so appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I think we're going to do the appointments on this as soon as we can. The council is not meeting for the next 2 weeks, so that the next time we could be doing this would be in early July. I don't believe we've got one additional person who wants to be reappointed, and so we might wait until we have an opportunity to talk to her and then do the appointments. But you don't need to be here for the time of the appointments. We will certainly let you know.
Okay.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your interest. The next one is Richard Weiss for the Facade Advisory Board. Good timing.
I'm just going to say I'm very efficient.
We've got the information that you sent, your email and your resume. Do you want to tell us why you're interested in being on the Facade Advisory Board?
You know, I've been in this community for about 15 years. I'm a lover of architecture and of the community generally that we have here. I've thought for a long time about getting involved in various ways in community politics. There are certain things I'm not allowed to do as an employee of the Post, including running to replace any of you. But this seemed like the kind of thing that I'd, have some, I think, skills at aesthetically and sort of rationally and public-spiritedly. And I think it'd be a good way to do something for the community.
Okay. Actually, in contrast to the previous committee that we talked about, the Facade Advisory Board is fairly active. They have a dual function, both in sort of looking at facades in terms of their whether they comport with the laws in terms of facades, but also giving people advice and recommendations and assistance in sort of putting together facades that are positive and add something to our business areas. So certainly if you do have an interest, you did mention in your email you have an interest in community development and historic preservation. Maybe you could talk just a little bit about sort of what your background in historic preservation is, and what kinds of things you think are important and that sort of thing.
I have to say up front I have no professional expertise, and to the extent that the job would involve giving some advice as well as following the law, all I can say is I can offer good research skills that I'd be happy to contribute to the process. I live in an old 108 or so year old Victorian. Most of my historic preservation work has to do with keeping it alive and well. It's a pleasure. We have a lot of old records. I'm into that house, and my wife and I do architectural tours and travel and spend time in places like Cape May and so on, just because we like checking out the architecture and the buildings. Took a trip to Stanton, Virginia a few years ago because we heard that had a lot of cool stuff. So I that's what I bring as a non-professional appreciation with good research skills that go along with my day job.
Well, we had intended the Facade Advisory Board to be partly made up of professionals and partly made up of people who were simply interested in the community. People who didn't necessarily have a professional background, and so, your lack of a professional background isn't something that would be a problem.
Right.
I certainly appreciate your interest in your willingness to do that. Are there other questions? Anyone else have questions?
No, I just thank you for coming forward and trying to figure out how your science background is going to work on this.
Well, I'll try to be able to tell if the sign is going to fall down or not.
That's a good thing.
Yeah. Okay, I think we've covered everything. Thank you very much. We appreciate your interest.
Thank you.
Next, we have a applicant, Charlie Pilzer, for the Arts and Humanities Commission. Well, very much appreciate your volunteering for Arts and Humanities. I guess I hadn't realized until I saw your letter that we actually had no actual performing musicians on the Arts and Humanities Commission.
Well, Mayor Porter, council members, City Manager Matthews, thank you for inviting me for the interview. I attended the open house that the Arts and Humanities Commission ran a few weeks ago, and in discussions with the current members of the commission and with Ms. Baines of the city, was informed that no, there were in fact no performing musicians on the commission at this time, that virtually, I believe, every member of the commission at the time are from the fields of either literature or mostly of visual arts, of the fine arts. I may be mistaken in that, but I was told that, gee, we could really use some assistance with the issues concerning musicians, of which, as you well know, there are many, many living in Tacoma Park.
And what I can add is that one of the charter members was Dave Lorenz, who is a musician.
Right.
And then Jonathan Mathis was on for a long time, and he was a composer and musician. So you're filling their void.
Yeah, we also have some people who are arts educators who cover sort of a range of things, but certainly we want to make sure that we have some active artists also on the commission. So in addition to that, we've got the information that you sent us. Is there anything else that you want to talk to us about your interest in the Arts and Humanities Commission?
Well, as you know from the information that I sent, which is really sort of an informal resume, grew up in the area, have been performing in the area for many, many years. And as part of that, I really make my whole life around music now. I'm active in the recording industry, working on 150, 200 recordings a year with other members of the Tacoma Park community, formed our own little record label. Sure that you've seen several of us perform, and just feel that I've taken a lot, have received a lot from the community, and that I feel I'm in a position that I can help offer support to younger artists, to existing artists, and to, when I say young artists, I'm even thinking a lot of educational opportunities. Part of my work with the NARIS board, which have just been reelected to, NARIS being the organization that sponsors the Grammys, I formed an education committee within the board that has, for the last 3-4 years, has presented a small grant program that is specifically for arts education, music education, to address that need in the community. And just see that there's lots of opportunities just for music education, particularly as some schools cut back. There's more and more in need. Arts and humanities, whether it's literature, poetry, dance, visual arts, music, all have a place in enriching the life of all residents in a city, in a community. And I like to think that I may have something to offer to help further that.
I certainly appreciate that. We're very fortunate that our Arts and Humanities Commission has been very active in sponsoring a number of things and trying to get a sense of what they can do to improve the place of arts in the city's life. And I think that that's, I mean, we have a wonderful community in terms of the breadth of artists and artistic talent in the community, and I'm very pleased to see them being as active as they are and trying to bring that out. And I certainly feel that the area that you represent would be something that we ought to have on the commission. So I'm pleased that you're coming forward and offering to do that.
Well, thank you. I was most impressed when I went to the open house. I mean, had I gone to the open house and been disappointed, I don't think I would be wanting to join in unless I wanted to turn the whole thing around. I was very impressed with how open they were, in fact, and that they were soliciting ideas for projects from the members of the community who were at the open house. And it would be quite a task to implement everything that was suggested.
Yeah.
But they were certainly willing to consider everything that was offered, and that my impression was it was a very good group to work with, that they are, I didn't know many of them as individuals, although we certainly crossed paths at various points, either at the folk festival or in other arts gatherings in Tacoma Park. And they, well, I guess as I said, they seemed active enough to make it interesting for me to wish to try to participate.
Well, they are very active, and they've done a great deal of very good work. Are there other questions that anyone has? Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it, and I appreciate your coming forward to bring your perspective to the Arts and Humanities Commission. I think it's very worthwhile. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me here.
We're going to move on to the Health Services Impact Committee. We had a series of interviews last week. We're going to do some more interviews this week, and then we have at least one that's going to be coming up in July. The people that we have in front of us today, you see most of them. Mary Carter Williams, Seth Grimes, Lois Wessel, and Drew Summers. And I see everybody but Lois here. So if people could just come up to the table. We've gotten all the information that you all sent. And what I'd like to do is, I think what we did last week was very helpful. We went through and asked a series of questions and asked each person who was coming before the council to answer in turn, and the individual council members took turns in terms of asking questions. And so I think I'd like to do that again. And maybe we can do this in the same order that you're listed. I'm trying to be fair here, in the same order that you're listed on the agenda, which is Mary Carter Williams, Seth Grimes, and Drew Summers, and do it in that order. And I guess the first question would be, the same question that I've asked people for other committees, which is if you could talk a little bit about why you're interested in being on this committee and what you think you can uniquely bring to the committee. And if you wanted to start.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Porter, and the other members of the council. When I heard back in September about the possibility of Washington Adventist Hospital leaving the community, I thought about a speech that Dr. King made many years ago, and he was at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C., and he commented on Rip Van Winkle, that as Rip Van Winkle went up into the mountain, he saw a picture of King George III, and as he came down, he saw a picture of George Washington. And the feeling is that when I got that information, I was wondering whether I had slept through a revolution. And I wanted to be very certain that I didn't sleep through a revolution, because health care is one of our most important institutions. If you think of God, school, family, and school, then I think the fourth one would possibly be health care services. And we are living in a country in which our health care system is broken. We have more than 45 million persons who don't have insurance. We have a number of immigrants who have no idea where to get access to services in our own little small community. We have a segment of immigrants who depend on the hospital for primary care and emergency care, and then we have seniors who depend on that hospital. And I want to ensure that those populations, including African Americans and Latinos, and also persons such as myself who have used the hospital over the years, will have a greater sense of what's provoking or causing this change and how we can help to guide the change over a period of time. And as the head of a diabetes foundation, and we all know that diabetes is the 6th cause of death in this country, I just found a recent statistic about 1 of every 3 Americans in this country is a diabetic. And many of the persons in this community depend on the hospital for diabetes services through its program. So I think it's critically important that we keep up with this profound change that is about to happen in our community.
Okay, thank you. Seth? Same question. Why are you interested in being on the committee, and what do you think you can uniquely bring to it?
Thank you, Mayor Porter and council members. I'm no expert in healthcare services or policy. I'm a consumer like all of you, but I come at this from a perhaps different point of view from the other council members in not being a policy or services expert. I'm concerned with the well-being of the Tacoma Park community in general, everyone who lives within the city's borders and across our borders, because we have defined corporate borders, but we interact very significantly with people in other parts of Prince George's, in Montgomery County, Prince George's County, District of Columbia, and so on. Through my interest in Tacoma Park affairs, I identified healthcare services as one of the 3 or 4 most important issues that the city faces that are inadequately met going forward into the future, into 5, 10, 20 years from now. And so I started really looking at the issue back last winter, I would say, a year and a half ago maybe. Talked to a lot of people on the county level, including officials, including physicians, including people who work at health services agencies, to really learn more about the issue, and I continued that learning process. So I'm here because of my concern for the Tacoma Park community, that the needs of everyone in the community are well met. Perhaps what might distinguish me in some degree from the other applicants for this committee is that I have consciously tried to reach out to everyone in every ward of this community, not necessarily successfully by any means. That's an ongoing effort, but that includes people who are not typically seen here in the council chambers or in city programs. The city has made definite efforts through recreation and other programs to reach out to all those people, but I think an outreach effort is definitely something that's needed, and perhaps this is an asset that I can bring a interest and a knowledge where to go to find people in this community, and a serious dedication to trying to do that successfully. So that's what I would bring here. No expert in healthcare matters, although I am a management and computing consultant and do have skills in research and report writing and reporting to organizations such as the council and the community that I would bring to bear. But what I have to offer is my dedication to the community and seeing that healthcare services are well taken care of for the years to come.
Thank you. Jude, you want to tackle the same question, why you're interested and what you think you can uniquely bring to the committee?
Sure. I'll just, rather than be overly redundant, I will echo, the concerns that both Mary and Seth have expressed about, adequate access to appropriate healthcare services for our community members. I do have expertise in this area that was outlined in the letter and the resume that I sent earlier, so I won't, belabor that point. But one thing that is unique, perhaps, that I bring to this is, in addition to the professional expertise that I could bring to the table, I'm an individual with a disability who has on multiple occasions used the services at Washington Adventist and would continue to do so if Washington Adventist, remained in its location, and may well continue to use Washington Adventist services even after it moves in 5 years. But as an individual with a disability and as someone who has represented both elderly and disabled populations as an advocate 10 years ago for the National Council on Independent Living and the Consortium of Citizens with Disabilities, I'm particularly sensitive to the needs of those communities. And when I worked for the Department of Health and Human Services, I was exclusively focused on working on the National Healthcare Disparities Report for Congress, and so I also have a fair amount of knowledge about the needs of communities like the ones that live in our community, both the Hispanic population and the African American populations. And I'm simply volunteering my services in hope that I could make a contribution when Washington Adventist does leave, because we certainly are going to have a lot of needs that will need to be met with that hospital no longer, situated directly in our community.
Okay, thank you. Mark?
Yeah, my question's for all three of you, and that's about the role of the committee. Montgomery County is going to theoretically create a health task force, and it's going to look at the issues that we were going to look at the small level in Tacoma Park, but for the whole southern part of the county. And we'll have a lot of expertise on that panel or available to that group that's beyond what we're going to have locally. And they're also going to be tackling the question, I believe, of what happens, whether the hospital in fact should move. The more fundamental question of whether this is the decision itself is the right decision for Montgomery County. And, my hope is that this committee, my hope, first of all, is that the county will allow the city to appoint people to this broader committee looking at the issue. And then my hope is that our own committee will become sort of like the eyes, ears, and resource group for our representatives, whoever serves on the county committee, to make sure that the interests of this community are represented at the county, because I think that the decision about the hospital and any evaluation about future health care needs and how to meet them in this community is largely going to be dealt with by the county committee. There's something going to be given more weight and be treated more seriously by the county executive, and I would imagine by future county councils. And so I'm hoping that being on this committee, that's a role you're comfortable playing, which is working with this larger county committee and making sure the city's interests are represented well on it, on both the health care issue broadly and the hospital issue narrowly. I just wonder what your reaction is to that.
I think it's very important to know about the county, because the county is Montgomery County is responsible for the delivery of health services in its particular catchment area. And of course, what it does is based on what the Department of Mental Health and Hygiene at the state level does. And I think what's critical to us, even though there's a commission, for example, on health as a part of the county, I don't think there's any representation on that committee from Tacoma Park. My concern is that the very peculiar needs of this particular community, whether we're talking about the immigrant population or the high number of seniors who not only are poor, but they're also depressed, or whether we're talking about the immigrants, that those special needs are taken into account. Now, I do know that Montgomery County has done a lot in terms of the role of multiculturalism and cultural competence in the delivery of services to different special populations. But still, if you want to speak to your own particular community, then that kind of special focus is needed to facilitate the information that's collected and massaged at the county level.
I don't have anything to add to what Mary said. My attitude is the same as hers. I wouldn't have phrased it, my response the same way, but my attitude is the same as hers.
I strongly hope that you and the rest of the council is successful at getting someone from the community, appointed to that committee, which I take it is in the works, but clearly not yet formed. My own experience with county-level committees, obviously not health-specific, but county-level committees, is that the southern part of the county is often, either misunderstood or simply forgotten with so much development going on north of here. And Also, given the fact that we border the district, there's often misunderstanding about the needs of, our specific community, Silver Spring, Tacoma Park, both. I certainly have no problem with, playing a backup role or, even, acting as a flame to sort of, light a fire under the county's committee, if they begin to, lose focus and only look at the needs of, the northern part of our county. But I obviously have no idea how that will play out since it's just a committee in the forming. But, I would be comfortable personally playing a role on either, entity, county level or city.
That's what I mean. The purpose of the county committee is to look at healthcare needs here so they can evaluate the effect of the move of Adventist hospitals. I don't think you're going to get caught up in everybody else's healthcare needs and what's happening in Gaithersburg, except to the extent to which the decision to move here impacts on other local hospitals. And I see Lois got here. So and this is a really important question for you because I read your resume. So the county's going to appoint a committee.
Right.
That's going to look at general health care needs here and evaluate the legitimacy of Washington Adventist Hospital's decision to move. I know that, you point out in your resume that you work on their health disparities committee, and you were going to look into conflicts. And what I want to be sure is that, particularly in your situation, that you're not put in the conflict, because it is possible that that committee may conclude that Washington Adventist's move to Randolph Road, essentially, is not a good thing for the community. And is that going to put you in a conflicted...
Well, I should back up and say, first of all, I'm sorry I'm late, but the Adventist Blue Ribbon Panel on Healthcare Disparities met over a period of about 6 months and finalized that work. That committee has disbanded. The work that committee set out to do, which was to help Washington Adventist look at, or Adventist Healthcare, and which encompasses both their facility in Up County as well as WA, decide on what were the priorities in looking at the disparities in healthcare throughout the county. And those priorities were developed and presented to the hospital, and that work is finished. The committee, that work is over.
Okay. So nothing you would do in any decision that might be made about the advisability of move doesn't present any conflict
Right,
for
and
you.
another thing is that the role of that committee was not to advise them where they should look for a new site. It was to advise them what kind of research priorities they should have on disparities in healthcare, what kind of services are needed in the county, and where they should be, and that was strictly outpatient primary care services. But the discussion of where a new hospital should be was not the role of that committee.
Yeah. My last comment is I think you'd all be great on a committee. I think you bring a variety of different skills and interests to this, and I think that you'd be very active in protecting the interests of Tacoma Park and the greater Tacoma Park community. So I'm thrilled that you're all applying for this, and I think you're going to have a bigger role than you think, because I think the decisions that you're going to be part of making are actually going to be a lot bigger than an evaluation of needs just in Tacoma Park.
And perhaps I can just follow up on the point that Mark just made, which was that we were also hoping to have a person from the Adventist, the Center on Health Disparities, the thing that's being set up as an ex officio member of this committee, along with representatives of the county health departments and potentially some other people. So we are trying to get that coordination between what they're working on. And I hope we can do that, as Mark said, without having people in a difficult position. But I do think that there is a place for that coordination that's going to be very important, as well as the coordination with the group that's being formed at the county level. So I think that's important.
May I add, on the question of the county committee, I note in particular in the draft resolution that you have here that you mention having representatives of Prince George's County and the District of Columbia working with the committee in an ex officio manner. This is something I can speak for Mary as well, think is very important to do, and that we, as a more intimate group can perhaps make sure happens in the county level as well. In particular, as you're surely aware, I believe a majority of Washington Adventist Hospital clientele comes from Prince George's County, and we have a lot of issues as a community in the Tacoma-Langley Crossroads area, in nearby parts of Silver Spring, that we can and should, as a city, be very interested in seeing approached to the satisfaction of everyone within our borders and across our borders. And that's something that a priority, I believe, would be shared by everyone sitting at this table and by you all, and that we can pay special attention to, making sure that what we discuss and what the county committee discusses perhaps does look across the border into Prince George's County and the adjoining areas to the benefit of everyone in the greater area.
I thank you all for coming tonight and for volunteering for this committee. I'm not going to take up a lot of time with a bunch of questions. I think it's obvious from your background, from your enthusiasm, excuse me, that you'll make good committee members. I think this is a very important committee for this city and for the future of the residents of this city. And so I just wanted to tell you I really appreciate your volunteering for this and look forward to the work of the committee. Thank you.
I have one additional question that I also asked the folks who came and talked to us last week. And Seth, you've touched on this to some extent. We're looking at people from a variety of backgrounds for this committee, and I think that we want to make sure that we do represent the different points of view within the community. We have a number of people, and I'm very grateful that we do a number of people with health-related backgrounds. But no matter how well we do in terms of picking the 12, 15 people who are on this committee, we obviously won't cover the entire community. And so one of the important things that I think this committee is going to have to do is to reach out to the wider community. And if you could talk a little bit about how you see that working and what kinds of things that the committee could do to make itself feel comfortable that it was in fact representing the viewpoints, or taking into account, shall I say, the viewpoints of all of the groups within our community. If you could talk a little bit about how you would see that happening, that would be helpful.
Well, I think there are a number of ways in which it could happen. For example, we're all familiar with certain initiatives that have been started by the county. There's a Latino health initiative. There's an African American initiative, especially dealing with diabetes. And therefore, there's a health committee, for example, on the League of Women Voters that's done this wonderful study of the status of health care for immigrants throughout the county. So I think by connecting with persons who are involved in those various kinds of initiatives, that is one way of ensuring that different viewpoints and perspectives are brought into whatever study that we do. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to randomly various populations in our community, for example, our seniors. And one of the good things about being on other committees for the city is, for example, working on the city manager committee. We got a chance to know what those various segments are and how to get in touch with them and how to distribute information through those various structures. So I think by pulling in that expertise, too, we can begin to pull in various perspectives.
Okay, thank you.
I think a committee like this, or any committee, you always want to hear from those who are most effective. We've probably all been in situations where we've wanted to bring in the immigrant community or the elderly or the people who are the most vulnerable in our society, but it's often hard because of the stressors in their lives to get them to come to meetings, and they don't have email, and they don't have cell phones, and that dynamic of working is often challenging. It's doable, but it's challenging. But I feel that I feel very fortunate to have very close contact with the patients who would be most affected by the hospital leaving. As a Spanish-speaking nurse practitioner who works for Mobile Medical, which is the largest provider of care to the uninsured in Montgomery County, I serve at 2 sites at the Long Branch Community Center and at CASA of Maryland. And the patients who come to those sites get referred to Washington Adventist for a variety of services. The patients who also come to those sites have limitations in what WA can do. They also, if I look at their chart and I say, oh, they live in Hyattsville or they live in Riverdale, I also know that there's other things that they don't have because they don't live in Montgomery County. So I feel that I am aware of the resources and the lack of resources for the people who are uninsured, underinsured, as well as what are the good resources, what are the other community health clinics, what are the health programs, what are the new programs that are hopefully coming down the pike, such as the school-based health clinic at Rolling Terrace that we've started to meet about. So I feel like I bring a perspective of understanding many of the cultural and linguistic realities of the patients who are most in need of health care in Tacoma Park.
Okay, good, thank you.
To focus in particular on vulnerable and underserved populations, as Lois was explaining, we all understand where in our relatively small city of fewer than 18,000 people, those people live. And while it is difficult to reach them because of schedules and so on, the amount of time they must spend working with families, we can do some outreach that would go to them in places like the Franklin at 7620 Maple Avenue and other buildings along Maple and Lee Avenues, to the New Hampshire Towers building on New Hampshire Avenue, and to Victory Tower as well. We know how to find the people who might be underrepresented and not likely to show up at a meeting that we call somewhere other than where they live. In other words, we can make it easier for them. Lois has mentioned that in the course of her normal everyday work, she sees people who are using these services and so on for the purpose of investigation and so on. We can we can and should take efforts to go out to people who are not getting services at that particular moment and might be more inclined to have a discussion.
Just to echo what Seth said, when I worked for the National Council on Disability, I had the opportunity to sort of do exactly what he was talking about and do traveling, essentially, traveling town hall meetings, and they tended to be phenomenally successful with elderly and disabled populations because you actually could get, good attendance and, bring folks out to meetings who wouldn't, like Seth said, necessarily be able to make it out to a meeting here. And I do think that he's right. We know generally where most of these folks are, and we could reach these communities in just that fashion.
There are other mechanisms similar to what Lois was describing. I went along just once with Councilmember Siemens and his wife Joyce to do food deliveries at the building I mentioned, the Franklin. People come out for that. It presents an opportunity, perhaps. I would look to the judgment of the people who are working with folks there on a very regular basis. But it offers an opportunity to interact with people who need services that, let's call it, are roughly analogous to the kind of services that we're talking about here. And we can identify other ways of reaching people, for instance, by talking to school authorities who have some level of understanding about the needs of the kids who are in the schools and perhaps through them families and so on. So there are various organizations, mechanisms, and so on that we can exploit to further our research purposes.
And I think one of the most important mechanisms would be the church. In fact, many churches today do have health commissions or health groups that are designed to make their population much more aware of the various kinds of diseases, prevention and issues like that. So I think working very closely with churches is one way of meeting a lot of the ordinary folks who may use the hospital for primary care services or for emergency services.
Okay, those are all very good ideas. Mm-hmm. Did you have a question you want to address to the group, Joy?
I don't have a question. I'm thrilled to find so much expertise in our community. I know it's here. I have some myself, and I'm very glad that the council saw fit to establish this committee. I am looking forward to the work of the committee getting going and seeing what residents can come to the council with in terms of ways that we can better bridge the gap on health services, but also with hospital relations. So thanks so much for your interest, and I'm really looking forward to working on this.
Thank you all for coming out, and I would agree. I think that you all bring a very interesting point of view. For your information, one of the individuals that we interviewed last week does live at the Franklin, Pat Lovelace, who was very interested in the committee also. And so you may actually have more of an entree into the Franklin than you would otherwise have. So thank you all very much. We appreciate it. And as I said, we have a couple of, well, at least one other person who is going to be interviewed in July, and then as soon as we complete the interviews, we're going to go ahead and set up the committee and let you start getting organized. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda, we are moving into our special session at this point, and the first item on the special session is a resolution endorsing a proposal for the 2007 Community Legacy application.
Good evening. Following the council's work session a week or two ago, city staff went back and reviewed the budget for this coming year for the New Hampshire Avenue Corridor Initiative and pulled out a number of projects which we felt were appropriate candidates for the Community Legacy application. We also reinvestigated the feasibility of the Carroll Avenue streetscape improvements, which we have talked about on several occasions. What we're proposing to do is to submit, with your permission, a Community Legacy application to the state for $398,595 in grant funds. Of those dollars, roughly $74,000 would be earmarked for the New Hampshire Avenue Corridor Initiative, and the balance, $325,000, would be earmarked for the Carroll Avenue streetscape improvements that are planned at some of those intersections between the two projects that we've recently ended. What we have tried to do is to provide matching funds for both projects, and based on the FY07 budget, we've been able to identify roughly $60,000 in matching funds for the New Hampshire Avenue Corridor Initiative, which would include funding for an expansion of the internship which you've approved, establishment of additional trash and recycling containers along that corridor, installing some pedestrian kiosks up in the commercial areas, doing some tertiary gateway signs, and working with some of the property owners to make facade or landscaping or security-related improvements. We have not identified for the state any matching funds for the commercial corridor, or the commercial streetscape improvements in the Old Town area. There's nothing included in this year's budget. It lessens the fees, or it doesn't contribute necessarily to the application, but we think that it's still worthwhile in terms of proceeding with the request. Depending upon the outcome of the discussion this evening, we will finalize the application itself and submit it to the state at the end of the month. The deadline is June 30th, I believe.
Okay, does someone want to move this resolution? Someone want to second the resolution?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Are there any council questions or comments on it? We did talk about this last week some. I appreciate what you have to say about the difficulty of getting the larger grant, but I think it's worthwhile moving forward with it anyway, because it's a really critical project. I think they both are. And so I would agree with your strategy of moving forward with them both and seeing if we can get both of them.
Right.
Any other?
We have, based on the discussion at the last work session, prioritized the project, the New Hampshire Avenue Corridor being the first priority, given its predominance or prominence in the FY07 budget, and then identified Carroll Avenue streetscape as a secondary priority, with the assumption that we'll continue to identify other funding sources in the event the community legacy dollars are not available.
Okay. Are there any additional council questions or comments?
I had on page 2 of the cover sheet, I noticed on page 1 it says, the total request is for a $398,000 grant, but I was trying to follow the numbers on the second page and where it talks about the matching funds and the source, and I was trying to understand the fiscal impact. I wonder if you could just kind of review that for me so I understand this better.
Essentially, the matching funds would be for the New Hampshire Avenue Corridor Initiative. And what we've done is go through the FY07 budget and pull out those projects and those dollars that are specifically earmarked for the New Hampshire Avenue corridor, to use those to match the dollars that we'd like from the state. The exception to that is the $24,000 that's proposed as a match for the $30,000 in improvement grants. Essentially what we're hoping to structure is a facade or a landscaping or security-related improvement program where you as a business owner or as a property owner, if you make this investment in your property, will match you X number of dollars with grant funds in order to facilitate or encourage additional private sector development. So with the exception of that $24,000 figure, the balance of the funds are already included in your FY07 budget.
Okay, and then on the Carroll Avenue project, the DHCD financing?
It's a mandatory fee that we have to fold into the formula.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Are there any public comments on this resolution? All right, seeing none. All those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution passes. The next item is the resolution in support of the Neighborhood Business Works program for the Old Tacoma Business Association. We talked about this last week also.
I'll move it.
Second.
Okay, did you want to say anything?
I have nothing new to add.
Okay.
I would just like to comment that I think this is a great opportunity to support our business association. I appreciate that, them bringing this to us.
Maybe just to reiterate, the Business Association came to us with a request for a resolution of support. It does not involve city funding. It is a program that the Old Town Business Association, the Old Tacoma Business Association, is applying for, and the city is very happy to support their application, and that's what this resolution is about. Is there any public comment on this resolution? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution passes.
Thank you very much.
The next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing our legislative action requests to MML.
Good evening. 2 weeks ago, we went over the kinds of items that we might suggest to the Maryland Municipal League to make as priority items for the upcoming legislative session. And there were 2 items that were specifically mentioned that were easy to do, which was the same project, same proposal on municipal electrical energy aggregation, and for binding arbitration or third-party review to a tax duplication agreement. And so those 2 draft legislative action request forms are included in your package. There was another item that was discussed which has to do with appropriate assistance on property taxes and finding if there's a gap there that perhaps the Maryland Municipal League could assist with. I have not had an opportunity to see if there is any study done yet. I have a feeling that it's still too early to get a good assessment about what the impact would be on different populations in our community. I would suggest that it is of importance, and it's something that we could put forward kind of on our own or with others as the process goes forward. But I didn't have any way of crafting anything at this early date that would make a strong case for a legislative action request this session with the early time frame that MML requires for their LARs.
Okay. Does someone want to move this resolution?
Move it.
Someone want to second it?
Second.
Okay. Did you have a question?
Yes, I have not just a question, but a frustration.
Yes.
There was, I had suggested maybe we could do something about housing, that there was some way we could support housing in our legislative action requests.
Mm-hmm.
And right before this council meeting, I received an email response from the Council of Governments regarding an initiative that I think we should consider. But in that I had a meeting right before this council meeting, I didn't get an opportunity to bring that information with me tonight. I wonder if there's any way that we would be able to either defer this vote until after the break so I could provide that information, or if there's some other way that we can accommodate that request.
MML does have a deadline, and it would be useful to have a little bit of time to prepare the application. But the one thing that I've learned is that there's a little bit of flexibility as we go forward over the next couple weeks. And we've got the MML conference next week.
And basically what I'm suggesting is supporting an existing bills that are before the
state legislature?
Before the state legislature, yeah.
Well, I would be willing to defer the vote. It may be that we don't have time to look into it, but if that's what we need. I mean, the other thing that we could do is we could go ahead with this resolution and then
we could do a subsequent resolution.
And do something afterwards. That would be past the June 30th date, but
not by much.
But not by much, right.
Were you talking about voting after we take a break at 9 o'clock?
Yes. Just so I would have
I'm
an
happy
opportunity
to
get
support
my-
that. I think if we can't wait 10 minutes to vote on this, there's a
Well,
problem.
no, but my concern is that even if we have the benefit of the email that Terry received, it may not provide adequate information for us to determine whether we want to.
We can at least decide whether we want to postpone the vote.
Yeah, no, I said I'm willing to postpone the vote if people want to do that. If it turns out that we don't have enough information to make a decision on it, it's still possible to go forward with the two items we've got and then try and bring up another item at a later date. I think that's
Yeah,
the
I'm open to a
possibility.
variety of things. I usually try to do some background research before I bring it to you, so I feel a little bit
Right.
unprepared.
And I think
You're
it's
blindsided, yes.
And I think it's also helpful in terms of the council making a decision, but I don't have a problem with postponing it. Basically, what we would, I think, choose to do is we would, since it has been moved and seconded and it is on the table, we would have to take a vote to table it until after the break.
I would like to move the table.
Okay. Someone a second? Second. Okay. All those in favor of tabling it until right after the break, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, we will take it up right after the break. I just wanted to add one piece of information. I have also spoken to Sheila Hickson, who is willing to sponsor the municipal tax duplication arbitration process. I think it's preferable that it go through MML, because then you have the support of the entire entity. But if and then, of course, usually what they do if they make it a priority is they decide which member they would like to have go forward. I will let them know that she's offered to do that if they do take it up. But if they don't choose to take it up, she is willing to do it, and I think that that would put it in a very good position, given that she's the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. So that might have a life even if it doesn't get selected as a priority by MML. Okay, we've tabled this one very temporarily. So we will take up the next item, which is a resolution approving participation in the new pension system, which we, again, talked about last week.
Just one new piece of information I just wanted to highlight for the council is since the work session last Monday, AFSCME Local 3399 was informed of our intent to go forward, and they have expressed their support. AFSCME was a strong proponent of the passage of this legislation.
Okay. All right, we have in front of
I'll
us.
move it.
Okay, somebody want a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. This is a resolution for the city to elect to go forward with an improved pension system. It would require additional employee contributions. It would also require additional city contributions. I think we were told the approximate amount for, it doesn't affect this fiscal year, it affects next
It's about
fiscal year.
$84,000.
About $84,000 in fiscal '08, which is not this upcoming fiscal year, but the one after that. Any additional council comments? Any public comments on the resolution? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution passes. The final item on our special session agenda before we take a short break is the second reading of the ordinance on the fiscal '06 budget amendment number 6. This is on the current fiscal year's budget, and it's the final, or next to final budget amendment? for
It
this
should be
fiscal year?
final.
Okay.
I'll move it.
Okay, it's been moved. And
Second.
has it been- Okay, it's been moved and seconded. I didn't see any changes between first and second reading. Have there been
No,
any?
there have been no changes.
Okay. Are there any council comments on this? Was actually voted on last week for first reading. Any public comments? Since this is second reading of the ordinance, will the clerk please call the roll? Aye.
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 The ordinance passes its second reading. We will take a very short break and come back for the postponed item on the special session agenda, as well as our rent stabilization discussion. take up this resolution. Terry has provided us with copies of this, and my understanding from reading the material is that the request is to lobby the governor for funding for the Workforce Housing Grant Program.
I thank you, Mayor Porter, and I thank my colleagues for their indulgence and my lack of preparedness for this meeting. But yes, I was mistaken. The information that I got right before this meeting says that these bills have passed, and that what the support that they're looking for from this council and any other elected representatives within Maryland is for letter support to Governor Ehrlich. Susie, could you maybe describe it better than that?
Hope so. I just read it myself. Both the House and the Senate passed the Workforce Housing Grant Program, and it was building on a task force set up by the governor in the past year. And the program would provide flexible capital funds to qualifying local governments for development costs of workforce housing located in priority funding areas such as Tacoma Park. Now, in reading the background information, there's not dedicated funding for this project, and the Secretary of Housing and Community Development of the state has the authority to set criteria about what would qualify as matching grants, et cetera. In some of the background information in here, they talk about counties having to match any grants dollar for dollar. And so my guess is that there would need to be a little bit of discussion with the county and whomever about, what criteria would be most beneficial to make the program work. But it would be something that we could support and lobby for to encourage that funding to take place.
Okay, so my understanding is that at this point, for the legislation or the resolution we have before us tonight, it probably isn't a good fit for that, but it's something maybe this council could discuss again at a future date.
I think it is good, and maybe we can put it on the cycle. Suzanne's also going to take a look at some of the affordable housing tax offset programs, and this would be another way of providing affordable housing opportunities. Maybe the council can, prior to the next legislative session, can take a look at some of these other initiatives and see which things we would support. And this certainly does sound like something that we should take up. But I don't think that it probably is something that we need to put before MML at this point. So I would ask that somebody move that we take this resolution off the table.
So moved.
Okay. All in favor of taking it off the table, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the resolution is again before the council. Are there any additional comments? Are there any public comments on the resolution? All right, seeing none, all those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The resolution passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. The final item on our agenda.
Yes, Mayor Porter, we have an item coming on our agenda now that has to do with the which units in the city will be subject to rent stabilization. And as an owner of units that may fall under the Rent Stabilization Act, depending on decisions made by this council, I feel I have to recuse myself from this discussion.
Right, thank you. Okay. We are continuing on, and for timing reasons, the staff has, continue on with our discussion of rent stabilization. For timing reasons, the staff has requested that we take up a question of which units are covered, as there is a issue in terms of the county's assistance and support for certain kinds of subsidized housing. So probably the thing to do is to start with an explanation of what the issue is, and then we'll start talking about it.
As the mayor's indicated, tonight's discussion is somewhat different than past discussions we've had regarding rent stabilization. It's been our intent to go through all of the various elements of the ordinance and reach some consensus on the council's part before we actually presented any specific language. Because we have been approached by Montgomery County as well as a local affordable housing provider, Montgomery Housing Partnership, we're expediting this small section of the ordinance. And depending upon the outcome of the discussion this evening, we'll return to continue the discussion of the remaining elements of the ordinance. Essentially, Montgomery Housing Partnership has been working with Montgomery County to acquire and renovate and maintain as rental housing a number of properties in Tacoma Park. But because of the uncertainty with the rent stabilization ordinance and its impact on their operating cash flow, they've asked us to expedite the section of the ordinance which deals with units subject to rent stabilization. What we've done is go through and provide some language which addresses the proposals that were originally presented by staff back in April. And they essentially, if you want to turn to the second to the last page of the packet, they do a number of things. One, they bring all rental units in Tacoma Park, regardless of the ownership, under rent stabilization requirements. Essentially what this would do would bring roughly 215 single-family rental facilities and condominiums that are owned by an individual who owns no other rental units in the community under the rent stabilization ordinance. It does then also provide some additional exemptions for the ordinance which are not currently addressed. The first would be Section 8 housing choice voucher or units that are subsidized under the housing choice voucher program. The second would be rental facilities in rental units in a rental facility that are owned by a nonprofit housing provider, which are subject to some income limitations and rent limitations under agreement with either the county or the state or the federal government. It would also exempt any rental facility in its entirety if that property was owned by an affordable housing provider and was receiving mortgage or operating subsidy from some governmental entity and was subject to an agreement which regulated the rents that they charged and the incomes of the people that were residing in the unit. We've also included, as was in our original recommendations, facilities that are owned by a nonprofit which are used for treatment, recovery, therapy, sanctuary, or shelter for qualified clients. And number 5 on the very last page, any rental facility in newly constructed rental facilities, or excuse me, any rental unit in a newly constructed rental facility. We have added language which would require any of these properties, be it an individual unit or an entire rental facility, be subject to an annual renewal or annual review of the ownership or the agreement to ensure that there is that continuity of the relationship with the governmental entity. We have also included language which would establish what the new baseline or the maximum ceiling rent would be if that exception was denied or discontinued. And frankly, that would apply primarily in Section 8 rental housing or units that are rented under the Section 8 program. It also specifically states that regardless of whether or not the unit is subject to rent stabilization, the rent could only increase once a year, and that the tenants of those particular units would have to be given a 60-day notice of the pending rent increase. Essentially what this would do would add 215 new rental units under the umbrella of the rent stabilization ordinance, but would also exempt roughly 500 units owned by nonprofit housing providers in Tacoma Park that we're aware of that would fall under the eligibility criteria, and would also exempt approximately 150 rental units that are leased under the Section 8 program. We would drop the total number of rental units subject to rent stabilization by roughly 435 units. So you'd be adding some properties, but then also subtracting. The one thing that I also had wanted to point out was that it's important to keep in mind that when a nonprofit housing provider enters into an agreement with the county or the state or the federal government, they establish specific income limits and specific rents. And frequently those rents are higher than the maximum allowable rent that could be charged for a unit at this point in time. So when we talk about affordable housing, it's important to keep in mind that what's affordable under that particular program may still exceed the rent limits that are in place for that particular building, that individual unit. It could also have an impact on the economic makeup of the tenants in that particular facility.
Okay. Can I just ask a question? I'm definitely getting lost. You've said a lot of things. I can't tell whether, are we on this page? The first page of the table?
We're talking about this, the draft. The draft lists 5 ways that a unit can be exempt. I wonder if I could just add, I've got questions about all of these.
Does this have something to do with this table?
It
yes.
ties back to the original recommendations.
Okay,
Yes.
so I would like to
section-
talk about this part of the table.
That's what we are talking about. The units subject to rent stabilization.
And what I'd like to say about that is that right now in this column, there is the first bullet and the 4th bullet that are not included under rent control. And I don't see them over here in this column.
Correct. There.
I'm sorry to be so concrete, but I just got lost.
Correct. What staff has recommended, and there has not been any discussion on this in past work sessions, is that all rental facilities, regardless of the number that are owned by an individual or an individual entity, become subject to rent stabilization.
So you're saying that your proposal is still, under staff recommendations, to extend rent control, basically, to landlords who have 1 unit and people who have an accessory apartment?
Correct.
Okay. I just need to go on the record to say I am vehemently opposed to that.
As I noted, none of this has been discussed by the council before. So what we've done is prepare language based on the recommendations that we've had. The primary focus from the county's perspective and from Montgomery Housing Partnership's perspective are the exemptions.
Go ahead.
I guess I would like you to come forward with the exemptions that we've talked about. And I've had extensive discussions with the county. There are many properties that are in play that the county may well acquire if this is done. And this would go a long way to solidifying, a portion of the supply of the affordable housing. And I would like to see this section brought forward. I'm inclined to agree with Joy about the extensions. I'm not interested in extending it to the single-family homes and wherever else for the accessories. But anyway, I think we've covered enough, and I think we had a discussion when this was brought up last time many years ago, and I was convinced then that that it made sense not to regulate in that area. But I do want to take this time to move the nonprofit stuff along, because some of the negotiations are very sensitive. They have very tight time frames, and we may lose buildings if we do not act expeditiously on the nonprofit request. And so I think we should move along those lines in the areas of the nonprofits.
I appreciate that. I can go along with moving expeditiously. This has now been presented to me as a council member multiple times. I have never once said I thought that was a good idea, and yet it remains the thing that gets presented to us every time. So
the council has never made a decision on it.
What do I, as a council member, need to do to make sure it's really clear that those 2 things in this column need to be moved to this column?
Well,
how do I do that?
4 of us have to say that.
Yeah.
Well, there aren't 4 of us here.
Well, let me just back up a minute.
Is anybody else willing to go on the record to say that? So Mark is
I am leaving it open. Let me ask my questions first. Because I'm actually less concerned about that issue than I am about what some of the things here are under the other exemptions. When we're talking about the Section 8 issue, I'm assuming that we exempt a unit that's leased to a tenant under Section 8 only while the tenant who has Section 8 is in there? What happens to that unit, say, if the tenant who has a Section 8 subsidy moves out and it goes to someone without Section 8? Then what happens?
It would no longer be exempt from rent stabilization, which is one of the reasons why we
Right,
like
but then
rent
would it go
to
back to would it go to market, or would it go back to its current ceiling,
And
previous
that's
ceiling?
something that needs to be finalized. And at the staff level, we've talked about that as being a possibility, that we would then go back to the most recent maximum allowable rent and apply any rent increases that were approved on an annual basis for units as a whole. That's an option that we have.
Yeah, my support for that would be contingent on handling it that way, so that it becoming a Section 8 unit doesn't permanent, because otherwise people are going to be, renting it to a Section 8 tenant, taking it off the market, moving that tenant to another unit, taking that one off the market, moving to another unit, taking them off the market. I agree that there are good reasons to exempt some units, but we don't want to create a situation where people can game the system, and I think this is one of the main ways that they could. So I would be willing to support what's under the first number 1, but only if, when the Section 8 tenant moves out, if it's then rented to a non-Section 8 tenant, if it goes back to the ceilings that it was previously under. And I know that we keep ceilings for units, even if the landlords don't raise the rents to the ceiling, we keep raising the ceiling by the increase each year, so we know what the ceiling is, and then if at some point they want to take a rent up to the ceiling, we know what they can take it up to. And it seems to me if we have the bookkeeping to do that, we should be able to do it with these properties also. So we can just keep the ceilings in play, and then if they then rent it to somebody who's not Section 8, we know it goes right back under rent stabilization. So it's exempted only during the time that it's rented to that Section 8 tenant. Now, the other thing that I didn't quite understand in number 1 is the exemption shall apply only for so long as the rent demanded does not exceed the authorized payment standard. You're talking about the payment standard that is permitted under Section 8?
Correct.
Because under the contract that I thought HUD had with the landlord, it can't exceed the payment standard.
The Montgomery County Housing Opportunities Commissions does allow Section 8 tenants to pay more than the fair market rent or the payment standard. It allows Section 8 tenants to rent a unit where the rent may exceed the fair market rent or the payment standard, but then they have to finance that additional rent. So, for example,
backwards.
I know it doesn't make sense, but it's
Because
a
that's what Section
possibility.
8 does, is it's supposed to then pay the...
What they do is they pay the difference between the maximum rent or the payment standard and 30% of the tenant's income. If that particular tenant wanted to pay 40% of their income, for example, they would be responsible for the additional rent that was above that payment standard.
I don't think they want to. It's a question that they can't find.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so that's an option that's available to them. And if in circumstances where they may be placed in that position, then the unit would not be subject to rent, or would be not exempt.
Okay.
So as long as the rent for that particular unit, which was rented or leased to a Housing Choice Section 8 voucher family, then it would be exempt. But as soon as the rent that was charged exceeded that payment standard, then it would be
Which
subject
is probably
to rent
higher than the rent
stabilization.
stabilization ceiling, which is a huge incentive for them to keep it under
Correct.
the payment standard. Okay. I got that. I understand that now. In terms of 2 and 3, I'm not quite sure what the difference between 2 and 3 is.
2 is primarily focused on an individual unit. 3, the intent there is for the entire rental facility. We have to
Okay.
go back through and make sure that the language is very clear, because there has been some concerns that it's not specific enough right now.
Okay.
But that's the intent.
That would be important. I guess the other question is, in cases where we've had nonprofits come before the council to ask for something like a pilot, we've had the opportunity to talk to them about the rents they would be charging. Is there some mechanism in here where we would get a chance to, like, review the rents that they would be charging in terms of the regulatory thing before we exempted them? Or do we just exempt them sort of without even looking at what they're going to be regulated at? I would be more comfortable if we had an opportunity to review it and make sure that the regulatory agreement does in fact keep the rents to a reasonable level.
You're talking about staff review or the council review, and do you want the council to?
I don't think the council would necessarily need to do that. I mean, we could set some standards that, I don't know what, for example, I don't even know the regulatory requirements, how that compares to our rent stabilization ceilings. I don't even know what those are.
I didn't make additional copies, but I think it was at the last work session, we went through and we showed you how the actual rents that are being charged compared to some of the rent limits.
Well, you're showing us fair market rents. Is that what
which
they're?
Is basically.
Is that what they use as fair market rents?
There'll be different percentages of that fair market rent for the various programs.
Right.
And they vary depending upon the funding source or the name of the program. So some are based on 50% of the fair market rent, others are 40%, others are rent levels that are based on 30% of the median income of someone who falls within the 50% range. I mean, there's a variety of ways that that's calculated. We can make additional copies and give that information to you. Several meetings ago, we'd given you a chart that showed what the rent limits were for the various programs that were available.
Okay, that must not, either it didn't make it into my folder or I didn't realize that's what it was. That would be helpful if you could give us another copy of that, because that would be my concern.
Could I add on that?
Yeah.
I think that, I don't want the council or the staff, I think, to have to constantly approve and reapprove things, but I think what would be useful would be to ask the different buildings or the providers to, on an annual basis, tell us what standard they're applying so that we know, maybe who their target population is and what the rents are for the target population.
Well, I wasn't actually even thinking of doing it on an annual basis. I was thinking when they ask for the exemption, that we ask them, what criteria are you using? And then maybe we can set parameters, that would cover all the reasonable criteria so that, if anybody, as long as somebody was doing something reasonable, it would meet the criteria. But if, for example, they said our rent standard is 150% of the fair market rents, that wouldn't be, that's a regulatory standard, but it's not a good one.
What I've asked, I actually have a copy of the matrix, so if you just want to look at it this evening, I could give you that.
Okay.
We could go through and specifically identify projects or programs where the financing is tied to the income and the affordability of the unit. What I would hate to do is to go through at the staff level and arbitrarily decide what is affordable and what is an appropriate income limit.
No, what I was thinking was that the council would set some parameters, and that as long as their affordability definition fell within those parameters, you would look at it. When the exemption came forward, they said, we would like to be exempted. You'd look at it, make sure that what they were planning to do fell within the parameters, say fine, and that would be all there would be. I'm assuming that the council doesn't have to act on each exemption, do we?
So you're talking about just establishing another level of rent ceilings, and then if someone doesn't necessarily have any agreement with another agency regarding the incomes or the rents, that they could apply for an exemption? Say, for example...
No, I'm thinking of, I'll go ahead and look at this chart, but in terms of the different ceilings, I didn't remember, didn't have the paper in front of me, what the different rent ceilings are for the different agencies. And there also may be agencies that we don't know about who set some kind of rent standards. It may be that there's a moderate or a professional level rent standard that we don't know about, and they want exemptions for something like that. But just making sure, probably some of my questions can be answered by looking at the matrix. But the central concern that I have is that we don't exempt them just because they have one low-income tenant in them, for example. They are under some kind of regulatory issue that says they have one low-income tenant, and so therefore they're exempt. The entire facility is exempt from rent stabilization because they fall under some regulatory agency's purview because of the one low-income tenant.
We could identify on an annual basis specific programs that would address some of your concerns. Most of the affordable housing programs that we've come across identify either 50, 60, or 80% of the units within that facility have to have incomes that fall within a certain range and rents that fall within a certain range. So we could do that. That might be easier than picking a number.
Okay. But the parameter doesn't have to be a number. I mean, if we are comfortable with certain kinds of programs, then the parameter could be they fall under one of these programs. That would be fine.
But and the way it's written, it does apply only to units that are in fact covered by a rental agreement.
Yes, and it also something in here, or that are rented to a tenant who occupied the rental unit prior. So, and we have some of those too. Number 4 is something I think we do already. Question about number 5. I understand the rationale for not putting newly constructed rental facilities under rent stabilization. It's an effort to try and create additional rental housing. But since there's relatively little opportunity for additional rental housing in this community, I'm concerned that it provides too big an opportunity to game the system. I say that many years ago, I was actually a tenant in a facility that had managed, in another community, not this one, had managed to find, had wiggled itself into a loophole in exactly this kind of a provision, where they had a building that was constructed, but they managed to put off the date of its completion by some legal finagling that got them outside of rent control. And I'm just worried that this provides a huge loophole that if people are smart enough, they can figure out a way to get out from under rent stabilization. And I guess I just don't see the rationale for it to begin with under number 5, given that there's relatively little opportunity for new rental housing, just because we don't have the space.
Its original intent was twofold. One was to encourage the construction of new rental properties because we're losing rental units, we're not gaining any rental units. The other was to recognize that there is sort of a fine-tuning period, if you will, for a property to sort of even out as far as its operating revenues are concerned, so that rents that are established in year 1 may not necessarily support the building in year 2 or year 3 or year 4, given some unique feature or aspect of that property that the owner did not anticipate. But again, its primary purpose was to encourage the creation of additional rental facilities rather than the condominium conversion, or what we're seeing on a smaller scale are the 3 and the 4 unit properties that are being converted into 2 units, one occupied by the owner, the other rented out, and because it's a single unit, not subject to rent stabilization.
But what we were trying to do was maintain affordable housing. I don't know how it contributes to the goal of creating affordable housing if we allow newly constructed rental facilities to go straight to market. That's not additional affordable housing, that's just additional rental housing. And it doesn't compensate for the affordable units going to condominium to replace them with unaffordable units.
We're looking at it purely from a number of rental units available in the community. And right now, that can happen now. If you have say for example, you owned a single-family house and you decided to buy another single-family house. Both of those units would then be subject to rent stabilization because you own 2 units, regardless of what they look like. So it gives you an opportunity to establish a new baseline rent, and you've had some history, if you will, of what it costs to operate that particular facility. If it's something the council doesn't want, it was just part of our original recommendations.
But establishing a new baseline rent for what? I mean, it would never come under rent stabilization.
There's a 5-year limitation on this.
I was asking, but where's the 5-year limitation?
Yeah, where's the 5-year
I didn't see it.
limitation?
That was the intent. It's not written in.
There's no
Okay.
5-year limitation.
I was going to ask you the same question, because, I mean, if there's a 5-year limitation, then it goes under, that's
it would be
fine.
subject to
But we shouldn't kid ourselves, because any new unit that gets built in Tacoma Park anywhere is probably going to cost $180 to $200 a square foot to build, and it will not be affordable.
Right.
And we'll have rent stabilization on a unit that's not ever going to be affordable to anybody except people, certainly, middle to the upper end of the brackets.
The other thing that jumped out at me is, supposing you took a building and you renovated it or totally did it over, and you ended up with instead of 10 units, you ended up with 12 units. Well, this doesn't say that only the additional 2 are exempt. It says all of them are exempt. And so presumably this is an incentive for people to go, oh, goody, let's get a 10-unit building off the market, turn it into a 12-unit building, and then it's totally outside of rent stabilization. I'm just really worried about the opportunities to game the system this provides. Or
You could do that.
or maybe just, give people, like, I don't know, an opportunity to readjust the base unit after year 2 or something, after year 1 or whatever, keep it under rent stabilization.
But if somebody adds on a new unit at the cost of what it's going to be, it's really hard. I couldn't, much as I would like to, it's hard to imagine saying that after you've built something at $200 a square foot, you have to rent it for the rent of what's in the existing building, because that would never cover new construction. Nothing would get added. So I think your concern is right about gaming the system and then taking everything out from under rent stabilization. But I'd be happy to say everything that, the number of units that existed before stay under, and the new ones fall under the 5-year rule. Because nobody would, if you had to rent them for what the rents were in the building now, you wouldn't build anything.
The other thing that struck me that somebody could make, I'm fine with what Mark said, we can probably figure something out. The other thing that struck me, that you could take a 10-unit building and you could completely reconstruct it so that you ended up with 12 units that were substantially larger, and then you would make the argument, these aren't the same units, these are different units, they're not like the old units at all, and so they should all be exempt. I'm just worried about saying that something is out from under rent stabilization just because of new construction gives people all kinds of opportunities to finagle what they do. And I think preserving affordable housing is a worthwhile thing for us to do. I realize it causes distortions in the market, but I think it's worthwhile because we're preserving very rare affordable housing in this area. I think that allowing potentially huge exemptions like this distorts the market, though, even more, and not particularly for a good reason. It provides an incentive for people to spend time figuring out how they can use this to get out from under rent stabilization. The community that I used to live in, which I won't say anything about because I thought they had a bad type of rent control program, their response to every time there was a problem with rent control, they'd make an exemption for that thing, and pretty soon the whole program looked like Swiss cheese, and it collapsed under its own weight. And so I'm really nervous about creating exemptions, because I think one of the things we do very well in terms of rent stabilization is we are consistent across the entire city, and we don't have a lot of exemptions, and we don't have a lot of different ways people are dealt with. And so the program has sustained itself as long as it has, I think, because it's been very consistent, very fair. You come in, it's not a question of, well, if I got a smart enough lawyer, I can, get under this provision here, and I can have twice the rent that I could if I fell under this provision here. And so it doesn't create incentives for that kind of gaming the system. But the more exemptions you put in, the more opportunities you create for that kind of thing. And once you end up with a program that looks like this community's program with all the exemptions, once it ends up looking like Swiss cheese, and it just can't sustain itself over time. It just falls apart.
Just a question in terms of clarification regarding the consistency. Going back to the single family and the accessory units, that you'd like to continue to remain exempt from rent stabilization. There are other single family properties and other accessory apartments and other condominiums that are subject to rent stabilization. Would you like to exempt all of the single family and all of the individual condominium units and all of the accessory apartments?
Well, I understand that two of my colleagues feel strongly about it.
How can some be under and some not be?
Because some people own two single-family houses and rent them. So
but you can't have a second accessory apartment in a second house.
No, if you own two separate houses.
We're talking single-family.
You can own two houses.
Right. You can own two houses.
And we said, but then you're in the business of owning and renting, which is different than how we treated accessory apartments, which is taking a space in your house.
I just spoke about accessory, but I'm talking about regardless of the ownership. In the interest of consistency, do you want us to look at what impact that would be if all single-family homes, for example, were exempt, regardless of who owned them. We don't have a lot of people that own more than one or two.
Maybe about 10.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a very large number.
Right. No, my recollection is the reason we exempted the person who owns just one is that we do have people in the community, for example, who own a home, go out of the country for a couple of years, rent the home, and then come back and live in it again. And we weren't thinking of that as part of our overall rental stock.
That may have been the situation when the decision was originally made to exempt those particular units, but that's no longer the case. If you go through and you look at the mailing addresses of the folks that do own single-family homes that are licensed, they're frequently still within the region, and their other address is listed as their primary place of residence. We have a couple of folks that are overseas, for example, and have overseas mailing addresses, or their tenant serves as their agent, but a majority of the folks still live in the region or have retired to southern climes.
Yeah. I don't have a problem with putting under rent stabilization single-family homes that the person owns a number of single-family homes, only one of which happens to be in Tacoma Park. I realize that those people are now exempt. I don't have a problem with putting them under rent stabilization. I think I do see the rationale for, a family that owns a single home, goes out of the country and rents it and then comes back, or intends to come back, whether they actually do or not. But is renting their family home or is renting an accessory apartment in their home, it seems to me that those are different situations than a person who owns a number of pieces of rental property as a business. And it's the second group that I'm interested in covering. But if there's a way we can distinguish between those two, I would like to keep the second group still. I would like to put the second group back under rent stabilization and continue to exempt the first group.
And I can think of another reason that would concern me is in talking to people in College Park, where owning and renting single-family homes can become a business, and if it's out from under rent control, then that can become very attractive. You can, bring in group homes. You can charge, 5 people $800 or $900 a month. I don't know if anybody saw the article about what interns were paying to live in 70-square-foot rooms. It could be really attractive to carve homes up and get rents like that if we were to do that. And I don't think it wouldn't be good for the housing stock, and I don't think it would be accepted very well in our neighborhoods. So I would agree with Kathy about treating those which are really like, when it becomes a business, when you've got 2 or more of them, then I'd keep them under, and the one I'd leave the exemption for.
I mean, I think we could set
opinion on that is that anyone who owns a house currently and is not under rent control should not all of a sudden become under rent control. So,
well, we could grandfather in current owners.
Yes.
Is there a way that we can determine whether someone who owns a single property in Tacoma Park owns other properties outside of the city? Can we determine that?
We used to be able to do that, but the state property tax website has changed, so no, you can no longer search by owner. You can only do it by address.
Is there an entity that we could send an inquiry to? Could we send an inquiry to the state, whatever it would be, and ask them if owner such and such owns properties?
We can explore that.
Because I would be willing to grandfather in current owners. In other words, if somebody owns a property and say they own 1 in Tacoma Park but 10 elsewhere, and so they're not covered by rent stabilization, but they would be if we changed it, I would be happy to grandfather in the current owner, but then when they sold the property, it would come under rent stabilization if they sold it to somebody who was going to use it as a business rental property. If they sold it to a single homeowner, then it wouldn't, obviously. But as I said, I think that one of the reasons that our rent stabilization ordinance has been has lasted as long as it has is because we are very consistent in how we treat people, and we have made very few exemptions. And I think once you start making exemptions, you are running a risk of undermining the program. Now, I think the rationale for many of these is, clearly the rationale for exempting a rental facility that provides treatment or therapy or something, I mean, that's clear. And I also, the notion that we're exempting organizations that have other regulations that require them to provide affordable housing makes sense to me also, and I can see the rationale in the Section 8 as long as it's only temporary. But I think we have to think real seriously about the other ones. And I am concerned about the one about the newly constructed. I think we need to limit that.
Okay. As long as the people who own property don't all of a sudden find themselves under rent control, I'm okay. I'm not exactly sure whether the mayor and I are on the same page with that, but I just want to make sure. And then I would like to see on this draft last page that 6 and 7 be added so that any one rental unit, provided the landlord owns no more than one rental unit in the city, is added as an exemption, and any accessory apartment is added as an exemption.
Well, I'm okay with the accessory apartment, but as I said, I would like to figure out whether we could exempt only those single rental units where the owner owns only one rental unit anywhere.
I'm sorry, I just can't support that. I think that if they own one house in Tacoma Park or one unit in Tacoma Park, we cannot all of a sudden say, guess what, you're under rent control.
I'm saying I'm okay with them being grandfathered. I would write the law as saying they would no longer be exempted, except that those people who owned their property as of the date that we passed the law would not be under rent control as long as they continued to own the property. That's what the way I would write it.
I think that's part of the reason we're recodifying is because this is very difficult and convoluted to administer. And if you're saying that that caveat is critical for you, I would wonder whether the ease of administration would outweigh that.
Well, I mean, we're all providing comments to the staff, and there's several members of the council who aren't here. So, you know, I think I would ask you to look into the possibility of being able to determine whether somebody who owns a single rental property in Tacoma Park, whether you could determine whether they own property elsewhere. And then if that turns out to be possible, then we can talk about how difficult it is or it isn't. But that would, that would be a concern. But I would be happy with grandfathering the people who currently own the property out from under rent control.
Could I ask for clarification for Councilmember Austin Lane's comments?
Joy, can you answer a question here?
You're talking about adding item 6 and item 7. One would be anyone who owns...
Bullet 1 from the table and bullet 4 from the table.
That's what's in the current ordinance.
Thank you.
There is some redundancy there, however, because if you own an...
I'm happy to look at what you'd propose to make it consistent with this draft. But I really would like to see, by the time this comes back to us again, something different than this same table, which keeps getting presented to us. And I believe people have made comments about it, but it's never moved from current ordinance to staff recommendations. And so I'm feeling that if we don't sit here the longest and say the last word, that we're not going to get that change, and I'm not sure I understand why.
My question is, an accessory apartment is a single unit, so it may be redundant to include both accessory units as well as a single unit. So if we were to come up with language to have just a 6 rather than a 6 and a 7, so to keep it simpler, because
as I said, I'm happy to entertain any proposal that you want to bring back to us for us to finalize this memo. But I want to make sure that bullets 1 and 4 are included in our list of exemptions. I don't know how to make it any more clear. I could write it for you, but I'm saying that I'm open to what you suggest.
You may not see both the word accessory apartment and a single unit in the ordinance.
And if a building had a main unit and an accessory unit, but the owner didn't live in it, they would by definition have more than one unit, right?
Correct.
So things that are accessory apartments that the owner doesn't. So that when we exempt accessory apartments, it's by definition accessory apartments where the owner lives in the main. Okay. Well, I think if you can explore, so it sounds like the single unit, it covers both of those. And if you could also explore how difficult it would be for us to determine whether people who own a single unit in Tacoma Park also own other units, I think that would be helpful. Since we have a number of members of the council who aren't here, it's very hard to know what the majority of the council would do. And I think it's worth exploring both of those so that we can give the council options when it comes back.
At the risk of sounding difficult, are you talking about units in Washington, D.C., Virginia, Maryland, Delaware?
Well, I guess what I would ask you is, what can you do without too much difficulty? Okay. In other words, come back, and if it's possible to do, make a proposal. If it has to be Maryland, because we, would be looking in Maryland, if there's a way to look in the general area, whatever, let us know what would be feasible to do without too much staff time and effort. So does that give you sufficient direction?
Just to make sure. We're talking about keeping one, again, recognizing that we'll have to go through and just make sure the language is appropriate.
The language would be that the exemption is removed at the point where the Section 8 tenant lives and isn't replaced by another Section 8 tenant, right?
And frankly, that probably won't be in item 1. It would be more in the annual renewal or rents upon termination of exemption.
Okay.
I mean, that's where it's intended. Number 2, keep, again, making sure that the language is clear enough. 3.
And you're going to give us another copy of this. I'll give you back your original here, but you're going to give us another copy of this so we can look at it.
Right, and you can keep that. It's
okay, all right.
Same with 3 and 4. 5, the consensus is to delete number 5, or just to limit the exception to the new units in a building. Just eliminate it. Because frankly, otherwise, if you have a building and you add new units, you end up with smaller units, and that may not be.
Or you make the whole building bigger.
Or you make the whole building. If you change, right now the way the ordinance is written, if you change the configuration of a unit, you can establish a new base rent because it's no longer a 2-bedroom unit, it's a 3-bedroom.
So if we take out 5, will it hurt anything in terms of the consistency of the overall section? I don't think it does. No. Okay. So the suggestion, you're talking about removing 5 entirely? Is that what you were talking about doing?
No, I was saying give it 5 years.
Oh, so you're talking about giving them...
the language they said they forgot to include.
Okay. Yeah. Is 5 the right number of years, though? 2, 3?
5 is what we found to be standard, for lack of a better word, in other places.
Yeah.
Well, I still have some concerns about it, but let's look at the language.
Adding as another exemption ownership of a single rental facility, and we'll explore the feasibility of actually investigating that.
Okay.
And then as far as rents upon termination of exemption, which would be item C, look at returning to the maximum allowable rent plus any annual rent increases that were approved during that time window of that time frame. And that, frankly, would apply primarily to the Section 8 program.
But we're going to use the maximum allowable, so theoretical rent increases are included anyway, right? In other words, the maximum allowable being different than the rent that somebody charges from year to year.
Right.
If you're on the Section 8 program, for example, and just you charge $200, and the next year you go up to whatever the new payment standard is, and then for some reason you terminate that contract. What we would do is look at the old maximum ceiling rent, which may have been $150, and then apply the annual rent increase allowance to that base rent for that time period that the unit was under contract.
Okay, I just
but it could be the actual rent.
And it could be, yeah.
Plus the stabilization allowance.
But if they're already at the maximum allowable, then it would just be the actual rent plus the annual adjustment. And if they weren't at the maximum allowable, it would be the maximum allowable plus the annual adjustment, or whatever else we come up with as a result of.
Right.
You should write it broad enough to whatever the council determines to be the rent upon vacancy. You know what I mean? Because if we wind up changing rent upon vacancy to something other than the maximum allowable.
Right, and that goes back to this whole thing, that this is sort of a stopgap measure.
Yeah.
Frankly, as you finish your review of the rent stabilization ordinance, you may go back and revisit
redo it
some of this
again.
same language to make sure that it's consistent. Otherwise, we will run into some of the same challenges we face now, or the example you cited earlier about an ordinance with a bunch of holes in it.
Yeah. Okay, I think, and I do understand the timeliness on this, and I think we do want to do what we can to encourage the nonprofits that are definitely promoting and assisting us in preserving affordable housing. I think we want to do what we can to make sure that they'll continue to work with us. So if we've covered everything, the council will not be meeting for the next 2 weeks. We are at the MML conference next week, and the week following that, Monday is the day before the 4th of July, and we have a number of council members and staff who will be gone various points that week, so it just didn't work out. So the council will not be meeting for the next 2 weeks. We will re-adjourn for the next council meeting on July 10th. Okay, if there's nothing else, we're adjourned. We'll reconvene, on the 10th of July. We're adjourning now, reconvene on July 10th.
Thank you.